So here's a question that's becoming less sci-fi and more, well, very real, very fast. When machines start to reason, when they make decisions, sometimes life or death ones, who's responsible?
Right.
I mean, who actually carries the moral weight? And let's be honest, the financial weight too. Is it the programmer, the company that put it out there, or somehow is it the code itself?
And that's the core of it, isn't it? What's really striking is just how quickly our traditional legal ideas, the ones we've relied on for centuries, are starting to look, well, inadequate when faced with machines that act on their own.
How so?
Well, think about it. Our whole justice system, really, across the globe, it's built on figuring out human actions,
Yeah,
human intent.
right. The guilty mind, mens rea.
Exactly.
Wow.
But what happens when that idea of intent just disappears?
Mm.
Or when the link between a human choice and, say, a disaster gets buried under layers and layers of adaptive code, the whole foundation for liability starts to wobble.
Okay, so finding a new foundation, that's what we're digging into today. This deep dive, it's really anchored in some fascinating work by Mr. Zaheer Ahmad Meer. He's a constitutional and corporate lawyer, a visionary author, and his analysis on AI regulation, rights, and responsibility in law gives us a great starting point.
Yes, Mr. Meer's work offers this really crucial global perspective on what's becoming a crisis of accountability. And we're not just talking abstract philosophy here. We're looking at the fundamental legal shift, the ethical shift that's needed when laws meet machines that learn, machines that act independently.
Machines that sometimes make better decisions than us, but without that.
To really unpack that legal shift, why are the old concepts failing? And maybe most importantly, what practical steps are actually being proposed? Real measures, things being written into draft bills right now to try and ensure AI is accountable before things get completely out of hand.
It really does feel like we're, I don't know, sitting in on the first day of court in a new digital age,
Yeah.
where the evidence isn't just fingerprints, it's lines of code. And the expert witnesses are data scientists explaining algorithms. Okay, let's get into the central dilemma. So, to make this really concrete, Mr. Meer uses this scenario. It's less a hypothetical now, more like something that's bound to happen, right? A self-driving car. Let's put it in a busy city, say a street in Lahore. Suddenly, there's an unavoidable danger ahead. The car calculates, like instantly, stay the course, passengers die, swerve this way, save the passengers. Maybe it's a family, maybe it's important cargo, but
But it hits someone else.
exactly, it calculates it'll injure or kill a pedestrian, someone on the curb, maybe waiting for a bus.
And that split-second calculation, that's where everything breaks down legally. The car does what it's programmed to do, probably based on parameters set way back, likely prioritizing the people inside.
The paying customers.
Right. So the passengers are safe, but the pedestrian is hit, tragically. And immediately, the traditional legal questions start flying, but they don't really land anywhere solid.
Who's liable?
Yeah. Is it the engineer who wrote that ethical trade-off into the code maybe years ago? Is it the owner who just bought the car and turned it on? Or, and this is the big hurdle, is it the AI itself, the system that learned how to make that trade-off over, millions of simulated miles?
Because the law always comes back to mens rea.
Always. For centuries, liability, especially criminal liability, hinges on that guilty mind. Did someone intend harm?
Yeah.
Or were they criminally negligent in a way a human would be?
But the AI, it doesn't intend anything.
Not in any way we understand it. It's not malicious. It's not negligent like a distracted human driver. It's running a calculation, an objective function, a utility score. It's pure action without mens rea.
So the laws we have, negligence, manslaughter, even basic civil liability that just don't quite fit.
They're rendered almost inert because that core element, human agency, human intent, it's
Right.
just absent.
Okay, but hold on. Let me play devil's advocate. Does this let the engineers off too easy? If someone deploys code they knew was flawed or had this kind of ethical blind spot built in, shouldn't they still be on the hook for negligence?
That's a really important point. And yes, individual negligence can still exist. But the problem becomes distance, temporal distance, informational distance.
Meaning?
Meaning, if an engineer wrote the first version of the code, say 5 years ago, and since then it's been tweaked, updated, trained by a massive deep learning model, can you really pin the blame on that original engineer for a specific, unique decision the system makes 5 years later?
The system has evolved beyond their direct input.
Exactly. It might have become functionally opaque, even to them. Their initial mistake, if there was one, might be buried so deep in the architecture it's almost impossible to directly link it to that final autonomous decision. The law struggles because the harm is right now, but the guilty mind is either missing entirely or it's diluted by years of complex system evolution.
So if we can't really hold the AI responsible because it lacks intent, and blaming the original coder feels insufficient, maybe even unfair given the complexity, where does the responsibility have to go?
It has to shift. Fundamentally, we need to move our focus away from finding individual human intent at the moment of harm.
Away from the crash scene itself.
Right. And look upstream. Look at the system design. Look at the integrity of its deployment. Look at the corporate oversight. We stop asking who intended this and start asking the company that put the system out there. Did you design this with enough safety checks, verifiable ones? Did you check for fairness? Was there enough human oversight planned for these kinds of predictable, dangerous outcomes?
So the legal responsibility lands squarely on the company, the entity that designed, trained, validated, and ultimately deployed it.
That's where it has to land for the legal system to regain its footing. It's a major paradigm shift.
A huge shift. And the source mentions something really interesting about evidence, too, like ethics entering a new jurisdiction, where lawyers aren't just quoting eyewitnesses anymore.
They're quoting algorithms.
They're quoting the code itself.
It's the necessary new standard. Algorithmic forensics. After that Lahore crash, the investigation wouldn't start with interviewing people. It starts by pulling the machine's logs.
What exactly was the algorithm doing?
What was its internal decision path? How did it weigh saving the passenger versus the pedestrian? What data did it actually receive? What were its confidence levels?
Yeah.
That whole mathematical sequence, that becomes the key evidence.
Okay, but we hear about the black box problem all the time. These deep learning models, they're incredibly complex. How do you cross-examine code if even the creators don't always know exactly why it reached a conclusion? You can't put the algorithm on the witness stand.
No, you can't. But you cross-examine the choices made by the designers within that code. You cross-examine the corporation's oversight of the data it was trained on.
So challenge the ethical settings they chose.
Yes. Challenge the bias in the training data. Challenge the fact that maybe they didn't do the mandatory audits we'll talk about, or that the system's reasoning wasn't traceable. It means the legal world needs a whole new skill set.
Algorithmic forensics experts.
Exactly. People who can reconstruct the AI's thinking. We're moving beyond skid marks and witness statements to the digital architecture behind the incident. And meeting that level of digital auditability, that forces us to think about rules, about rights for these AI systems. Because if liability shifts to the system's performance...
And the system needs to meet some basic standards to be trusted.
Precisely. It needs to earn that trust. Right. So if we're saying accountability moves from human intent to the system's operational integrity, well, that system has to operate under some clear, agreed-upon principles. It needs to earn public trust. We can't just, blindly trust a proprietary black box with decisions that affect lives.
It's like a baseline expectation, almost like a constitution, but for digital agents. If it's going to impact human life, health, jobs, freedom, it has to meet certain ethical standards, fail those standards, and boom, accountability kicks in.
And the source lays out three really core pillars for this kind of AI Bill of Rights. The first one, this is the one that often causes the most anxiety, I think.
Yeah.
Transparency.
Transparency, meaning people have a right to know how a decision affecting them was made.
Yes. It's crucial, not just so techies can understand it, but for basic fairness.
Yeah.
Procedural justice. If an AI turns you down for a loan or flags you as a security risk or says you're not eligible for health care, you have to have the right to understand why, to challenge it effectively.
But that bumps right up against the black box issue again, doesn't it? Especially with these super complex deep learning networks. Sometimes the developers themselves can't pinpoint the exact why behind a specific output. They just know it works really well. Seems like a direct clash with a right to transparency.
It does, and that's where the legal requirement has to be smart. Transparency legally doesn't necessarily mean the company has to spill all its secrets, reveal every parameter of its model. That could kill innovation, destroy intellectual property. But it does mean mandating that they reveal the logic, the key factors, the weighting, the confidence scores that led to your specific outcome. And here's the key point. If a system is so complex that its decision process genuinely cannot be explained or audited after the fact,
Even internally by the company.
even internally, post-mortem, then maybe that system shouldn't be allowed in high-stakes situations involving humans. Full stop. The right to transparency fundamentally means a right to AI that is verifiable, auditable, and explainable enough for accountability, even if the deepest text stays proprietary.
That's a critical distinction. Auditable logic, not necessarily open source code for everything. Okay. Pillar number 2, fairness. Sounds obvious, but this is where we've seen AI systems spectacularly fail already, right? Amplifying old biases.
Absolutely critical.
Okay.
Fairness is non-negotiable. Algorithms have to be designed to avoid bias. And crucially, they need to actively avoid spreading or worsening the biases already present in the data they learn from.
Because if you train it on historical data that reflects past discrimination,
Hmm.
say biased loan records or facial recognition skewed towards certain demographics.
The AI will learn those biases. It'll replicate them. Often, it'll make them even worse because it optimizes so efficiently on that biased data.
So this really pushes developers. They can't just be coders. They need to be aware of social context, ethics. They can't just dump data in and claim the machine is neutral.
No, the burden is on the developer and the company to actively check their data sources,
Mhm.
to constantly monitor if the system produces unfair outcomes for different groups based on race, gender, location, whatever, and importantly, to build in ways to correct for that inherited bias before the system goes live.
It demands proactive ethical design, not just hoping for the best.
Exactly, intentional ethical work.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the third pillar, tying back to that Lahore crash. Safety. The bottom line for any system operating in the physical world or making critical health decisions.
Systems must be built to fail gracefully, not catastrophically. Okay, failing gracefully. What does that actually mean in practice for, say, a medical AI or a self-driving car?
It means anticipating what could go wrong and building in safety protocols that default to caution when things get uncertain or ethically messy. For a medical AI diagnosing cancer, a catastrophic failure is missing a tumor.
A false negative.
Right. A graceful failure is the system saying, this scan is ambiguous, or my confidence is low here, and automatically requiring 2 human radiologists to review it. Mandatory human check.
And for the self-driving car.
A graceful failure might mean prioritizing avoiding hitting anyone if possible, or if a collision is truly unavoidable, initiating a controlled emergency stop or pulling over safely, rather than trying to execute some complex high-speed risk calculation that puts a bystander in danger. It defaults to the least harmful, most conservative option when it's unsure or facing an ethical dilemma baked into its code.
Okay, but isn't there a tension here? Often the safest systems, the ones that perform best in complex situations, are those really complex black box models. More safety might mean less transparency. But if you demand maximum transparency, maybe you have to use simpler models that aren't quite as effective, potentially sacrificing some safety. How do you balance that?
That's maybe the toughest regulatory challenge, finding that balance. The source suggests a pragmatic approach. If high safety demands a complex, less transparent model, then the company has to compensate by seriously beefing up the other safeguards. Much more rigorous independent audits, much more detailed data traceability. You might get to keep your core algorithm somewhat secret, but only if you provide rock-solid, independently verified proof that it's fair and safe through intense external testing and logging.
So if the inherent transparency is lower, the burden of proof for safety and fairness gets much higher.
Exactly. The law demands trust. If their proprietary nature makes trust harder, you have to build it back through other verifiable means.
So these 3 pillars, transparency, fairness, safety, they're not just nice ideas, they're the minimum requirements, the basis for legal competence for an AI system.
They're the tools for accountability. And this is a key takeaway from Mr. Meer's work. Rights without responsibility create risk. These rights aren't just for users. They impose real, mandatory legal duties on the companies and developers building these things. If a system violates one, if it can't be audited, breaking transparency, or it's biased, breaking fairness, then the legal liability snaps into focus because the company failed its duty to uphold that right.
Okay, so if the AI Bill of Rights sets what the standards the system has to meet, then this next part is about the how. How do companies and developers actually ensure those rights are respected? This is where the legal ideas turn into, well, engineering homework.
Exactly. We move from principles to practical, enforceable duties. And these duties are designed specifically to shift that legal burden away from the machine's instantaneous action and back onto the human processes, the corporate oversight that happened before deployment. The source lays out 3 really critical ones.
Let's start with the first. This sounds like trying to catch problems before they happen. Mandatory impact audits.
Yes, essential. These are about proactively hunting for bias, ethical conflicts, potential failure points before the system goes live or whenever it gets a major update. And crucially, these often need to be independent audits, not just the company marking its own homework.
And what do they audit for? Not just bugs in the code?
No, much broader. The scope has to be pretty exhaustive, testing the system in challenging, diverse simulations, looking specifically for what lawyers call disparate impact. Does it produce unfair results for certain groups, different demographics, different locations, different income levels?
So the audit isn't just does it work, but does it work fairly and safely for everyone? Okay, but who pays for these audits? They sound expensive. And how do you make sure the auditors aren't just, giving a pass to the companies hiring them?
The company deploying the AI has to foot the bill, yes. That's part of the cost of doing business with high-risk AI. To ensure independence, you need a regulatory body. We'll touch on that later, to certify the auditors and set really strict standards for how the audits are done.
Okay.
The audit needs to prove compliance not just with tech specs, but with societal impact rules. It might require specialized testing, what they call adversarial testing, specifically designed to try and trick the AI into showing bias. If that audit shows, say, facial recognition is 95% accurate for one group, but only 60% for another.
The company can't deploy it like that.
Not until they fix it. It forces them to invest time and money specifically on checking for societal harm, not just on making it faster or cheaper.
It puts ethics right into the engineering requirements.
That's the idea, which leads to the second mandate, underpinning that right to transparency: traceable data sources and model logs. Why is keeping detailed records so vital for accountability?
It sounds like the digital version of a chain of custody for evidence. If something goes wrong, a bad loan decision, a mistaken identity, that crash in Lahore, you need to be able to go back and see exactly what happened inside the machine.
Precisely. You need the ability to trace the specific input data, the state of the model at that exact moment, the confident scores it generated, everything that led to the problematic outcome. Was the data bad? Was the training flawed? Was there bias?
Without that trace, you're just guessing.
You are. This log, this digital trail, it has to capture not just the final output, but the internal reasoning, the confidence level, the key factors it weighed, even which version of the model was running. It becomes the primary evidence for any investigation after an incident.
And if the company can't produce those detailed logs when regulators or a court asks for them?
Then they're immediately in trouble. They've violated a core duty. It doesn't even matter at that point if the AI's decision itself was technically correct or not. They failed procedurally.
That failure to keep records becomes the liability itself.
It's a crucial legal lever. You can't hide behind the complexity of your AI if you didn't bother to record how it made its decisions. The logs are the witness, and the duty is to preserve their testimony. Failure makes the corporation liable for basically obstructing the investigation, creating clear liability where there was previously a vacuum due to the lack of machine intent.
Okay, audits first, tracing everything second, and the third mandate. This feels like admitting machines can't handle everything. Human review for high-risk outputs.
Yes, this is the essential fail-safe. It acknowledges that for certain really critical decisions, we simply cannot allow full automation yet, maybe ever. The duty is to clearly define which outputs are high risk and mandate that those decisions require a human sign-off before they take effect.
What counts as high risk?
Things that are irreversible, potentially catastrophic, or deeply subjective. Think about recommendations for prison sentences, decisions about turning off life support, firing employees, or, crucially, deploying autonomous weapons.
So in those cases, the AI can do the analysis, maybe suggest an option.
It can be a powerful advisor. It processes the data, flags the issues, maybe recommends a course of action based on its programming.
But the final, yes, the signature on the dotted line, that has to be human.
An accountable human professional. Someone trained, who understands the context, who reviews the AI's output and takes responsibility for the final decision. And their review process. That needs to be logged too.
This prevents the whole, the algorithm made me do it excuse.
Completely. It ensures that for the most critical choices, the ultimate responsibility, the amana or trust we'll talk about, stays firmly in human hands. So these three duties together, audits, traceability, human review, they create a structure. They move the legal focus squarely onto the corporation's process and oversight.
Right. So let's recap that shift. If the AI screws up badly, like the Lahore car,
Mm-hmm.
the company isn't necessarily liable for the AI's calculation in that split second.
Not directly.
They're liable because they likely failed one of these duties, they didn't do a good enough audit, or their logs were incomplete, or they let the AI make a high-risk call without that mandatory human check.
Exactly. They failed the oversight. They failed to ensure a system's integrity. And that failure is something the law can clearly identify and penalize, even when the machine itself has no intent. And it's really important to realize this whole conversation about AI ethics, about accountability. It's not just a Western legal issue, it's deeply global. Mr. Meer's analysis brings in a really valuable perspective from Islamic jurisprudence. It shows these ideas about trust, agency, responsibility. They have deep roots, centuries old, that speak directly to today's AI dilemmas.
That comparative angle is fascinating because these older concepts seem to provide an immediate moral language for what we're grappling with now. You mentioned two specific concepts, Nia and Amana.
Yes, Nia is about intention,
Mm.
purpose, conscious motivation. Now, okay, the machine doesn't have Nia, but the humans who built it, the company that chose to deploy it, they absolutely have intentions. We need to scrutinize their purpose. Was the goal genuinely to improve something safely, or was it maybe, cutting corners on safety audits to maximize profit faster? Even without machine intent, the human Naya behind the system is still there, and it's legally and morally relevant. It reinforces that accountability stays human.
And the second concept, Amana, that's about trust, integrity.
Exactly. It's about the responsibility that comes when you're entrusted with something important. The idea that trust must be preserved when machines act for us as our agents.
How does that connect to the Bill of Rights and the duties we discussed?
Directly. If we entrust a high-stakes task to an AI managing finances, diagnosing illness, controlling infrastructure, that system has to operate transparently, fairly, and safely to uphold the amana, the social trust placed in it. If the AI fails, if it's deceptive, biased, dangerous for them, then the humans or the company that deployed it have fundamentally broken that trust. They've failed their amana.
So Amana provides this powerful ethical reason why those regulations are needed. It's about maintaining societal trust when we delegate important tasks to machines.
Precisely. It frames AI failure not just as a technical glitch, but as a breach of trust, which leads us right into how these ideas are shaping actual real-world regulations. The source points to Pakistan's first AI ethics draft bill as a really interesting example of policy trying to get ahead of the curve.
Moving from philosophy to actual institutions?
Right. The draft bill proposes creating a dedicated government body. They call it the Algorithmic Accountability Authority, or AAA.
Okay, and AAA, and what would it do?
Its job would be to enforce all those duties and rights we've been talking about. The transparency requirements, the fairness audits, the safety protocols, the human review mandates. It would be the operational arm making sure companies actually comply.
And the source highlights a pretty striking model for how this AAA might work, comparing it to licensing professionals.
Yeah, this is really powerful. The proposal suggests the AAA would license critical AI systems, the high-risk ones, in the same way we license, say, doctors or pilots or engineers.
Wow. Okay, unpack that. Licensing an AI like a doctor.
Think about what getting a professional license means. You have to prove competence. You need ongoing training. You have to adhere to strict ethical codes. You have to understand failure modes. And if you violate those standards...
You lose your license. You can't practice.
Exactly. Now apply that to an AI system making life or death decisions or decisions affecting fundamental rights. Before that system can be deployed publicly, it would need to pass a rigorous ethical and competency test administered by the AAA. It needs its license to operate.
So how would that work in practice? Who's on this AAA? And what gets your AI's license pulled?
Well, the AAA would need a mix of experts. Lawyers who get due process, data scientists who can dig into algorithms and test for bias, ethicists who understand the real-world impact. A company would apply for a license for its AI system. They'd submit their audit results, their data tracing plans, their human review policies.
All the homework.
All the homework. The AAA reviews it, maybe does its own tests, its own stress tests on the system.
Yeah.
And if it passes, it gets a license. But it's conditional.
Ah, conditional, meaning?
Meaning the license depends on ongoing behavior. It's not a one-time pass. The grounds for pulling the license would have to be clear. Things like failing to keep proper logs, evidence of ongoing bias that isn't fixed immediately, or a major safety failure where the human review process was skipped or failed.
And if the license gets revoked?
The system has to be shut down, immediately taken out of service, no more practicing medicine or driving cars or whatever critical function it performs.
That model does two really powerful things, doesn't it? First, it makes ethics a hurdle you have to clear before you can even launch, not just a potential fine later.
Right, ethics is a prerequisite.
And second, it creates a regulatory body that's specifically designed to evolve with the technology, not chase it years later.
Exactly. Licensing builds in that continuous oversight. You wouldn't let an unlicensed surgeon operate.
Right.
Right? Same idea here for critical AI. You don't let an unaudited, unlicensed algorithm manage the power grid or make bail recommendations. It puts the threat of license revocation, basically, system deactivation right on the company. It enforces that societal amana structurally.
And presumably, the AAA itself would have to keep learning, keep updating its standards as AI gets more complex.
It would have to. Licenses would need renewal, requiring proof of ongoing ethical performance and adaptation to new risks. It's a really strong example of turning these global ethical ideas into a workable legal structure aimed at keeping humans in control, even as automation accelerates. #OutTrapTA.
Wow. Okay, this has been a really deep dive into, well, the new rules for digital responsibility. Let's try and sum up the key things for you, the listener, to take away. First, the big shift. Accountability is moving away from just looking for individual human intent, that old mens re-standard,
Right, because it often doesn't apply.
and moving towards examining system design, corporate diligence, and ongoing oversight. The old legal tools just aren't enough for complex AI.
Second, we talked about the foundation needed for trust, that AI Bill of Rights, built on transparency, fairness, and safety. And crucially, these aren't just suggestions. They create real corporate duties like mandatory audits, traceable logs, and human review for the riskiest decisions. These are the mechanisms to manage the risk.
And finally, we saw how deep global ethical ideas like Naya for intention and Amana for trust are actually shaping concrete regulations right now. Like that proposal for an algorithmic accountability authority in Pakistan using a licensing model, basically making ethics and proven competence requirements before an AI gets deployed.
Which brings us right back to that core philosophical point from the source material, the guiding principle here. Ethics isn't just a filter you apply afterwards. It has to be the foundation.
You don't just build the fastest car and then try to bolt on safety features later.
Exactly. You design the safety, the fairness, the auditability right into the architecture from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It has to be foundational.
A really powerful principle as we navigate this accelerating digital age.
And it leaves us, and you, with maybe one final thought to chew on, building on everything we've discussed. If we are heading towards licensing critical AI systems, kind of like we license human professionals, doctors, pilots, then how do our education systems, our legal training, even our prosecution strategies need to change? How do we train engineers, not just to code, but to build systems that can pass these ethical licensing exams? And if an AI system does cause catastrophic harm and its license gets revoked, what is the real amana, the professional trust and responsibility of the human engineer who built that ethically flawed system? And what specific consequences should the law impose for that failure of professional duty?
What's the penalty for breaching that amana as an engineer in the AI age?
That's the question that lawmakers, educators, and all of us really need to grapple with next.